Right, shall we move on to our segment 3, Carl, which is I've dubbed it the legacy of Le Champion, or why we love Chris Jericho.
I mean, they're both equally true and both equally awesome.
They are. So, as anyone who's listened to us from the start will know, near enough, I think, fair to say, Carl, every week we talk about how Chris Jericho is a legend in some way, or how he's great for the business. He's one of the best in the business, greatest of all time in a lot of respects. So the idea of this is for us to talk about some of the best bits, I suppose, from his career, just highlight a few bits and bobs, really. And just allow us to sort of sit down and talk about why we feel he's the best, and or one of the best, to be fair. Because I'm trying not to be unfair, because like obviously there's many legends in the business. I mean, we've both cited different favorite wrestlers of all time. For me, being the Undertaker, and I don't want to be wrong here, Carl. I want to say Bret Hart for yourself, Mr. Perfect for yourself. Sorry, the Canadians in general, really, for Carl. So Jericho's well hitting the mark there. But yeah, so obviously we're never going to stop talking. You know, if he does something on AEW, that's awesome. We're going to mention it, but at least this way we're going to settle why we keep talking about the fact he's the greatest, and hopefully we'll stop doing that some after this segment. So sit right back, guys. Crack open a little bit of the bubbly, and we'll talk for probably 7 hours, because A2theK is Jericho.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
I rehearsed that. Totally rehearsed. So I thought before we get into it, Carl, because for me, probably not so much for you, but for me, I started with WWF and wrestling in a big way. It would have been approximately 99, maybe slightly before, but it was around the time we started high school. Not to give anything away, guys, you know, of how old or young we might not be. So the Jericho I know has always been WWF or WWE as it is now, and then obviously AEW. But when I was researching for the segment, it was interesting to find out he's actually been involved in wrestling since he was 19 years old, which is a long fucking time. Obviously being Canadian, or at least part Canadian, I believe, is his father or mother potentially from New York.
He's from Winnipeg, you idiot.
Yeah, but he was actually born in New York, wasn't
he? Yeah, I think his dad played for.
Sorry, that was why he was in New York, wasn't it? He actually played for the Rangers, didn't he?
I was at Rangers. Yeah.
I'm, you know,
one of them.
We're limeys, aren't we? So we're not going to know 100% hockey all that well. But yeah. So basically, with him being of that Canadian origin, we have he become interested in wrestling and actually joined the Hart Brothers School of Wrestling. So that we have that sort of that heart connection, as it were, which again should be helping you mark out there. Something shocking, Cal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Every time you say the word heart.
Oh yeah,
my heart, you know, just saying.
So he started at the tender age of 19, Carl, wrestling on the independent circuit, and then actually probably one of the first I've heard of to be touring Japan in that era. And I actually again didn't realise, because it's not something that was prevalent in sort of my sort of fandom of WWF, that it was way back when. This is where he met Lance Storm. And they actually tagged together as well, and they wrestled in New Japan together for Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. I think that's it. Yeah, Frontier. I appear to have made a typo there, but there you go. Yeah, and then we had he travelled from there between 92 and 95, wrestling for Mexican promotions, using the name Lionheart, which is something that has cropped up throughout his career. I think his first autobiography was named Lionheart as well. So it shows that those sort of nods to that end of his career, I suppose.
Yeah, there was a nice little tidbit on that that I've been reading up on it, obviously, for the segment as well. And so apparently he got the nickname Lionheart from two of his fellow wrestlers at the time. So obviously way back when. well, surprisingly not actually. Apparently when in Japan and you know in Mexico as well, there was obviously a big rivalry at the time between Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, and at the time the two of them didn't really like each other that much, and they weren't really getting along, but they'd put on these amazing kind of spectacles, and you know Jericho said to himself that these guys were like the lions of the business, like the way that the matches they put on, and he kind of idolized them to a degree, and he wanted to be able to put on matches similar to that. And saying that they were kind of the heart of the business, and so it just kind of came from there, really, which I thought was a interesting little tidbit.
Oh no, certainly is. So yeah, so getting building up to his career, we had obviously he was working in Japan, and at the time working for Wrestling and Romance, which is again one I'm not overly familiar with, not following the Japan scene too much, but it was around this time and around this point that he gained the attention of Paul Heyman. With some thanks and recommendations from the likes of Chris Benoit and the hardcore legend himself, Mick Foley, as they were sort of a couple of the names that cropped up in terms of sort of pointing him out, I suppose, to Heyman at the time. And this led to him working in ECW for a time, admittedly a fairly short time, but all part of his rise, because during his time in ECW, he'd win their World Television Championship, going up against the likes of RVD and Mick Foley himself in his alter ego of Cactus Jack, and then again further in his career, grabbing the attention of WCW. Now, I'll stress on that this is WCW back when they were somewhat of a behemoth compared to the shadow of themselves that a lot of our fans might be aware of. WCW being sort of in its failing years in the late 90s certainly, and ultimately being bought by WWE. This was back when they were at their peak, I suppose, really. So he joins WCW in '96, which again had a fairly good tenure with them. Gained the Cruiserweight Championship, World Television Championship during this time, and then we would get to the point where I think both of us. I mean, before I go into it, did you see much of it in WCW, Carl? Because your wrestling history is much more grand than mine.
Do you know what? I've always been a WWF, WWE guy, but obviously when, as you said, there was a time when WCW were like at the height of popularity and beating WWE for weeks on end. So I would always find myself dipping in, and it was actually Jericho was one of the guys who stood out at the time. And you know we'll probably come onto it a little bit when we dive into some of the best kind of things that we remember seeing from him. But he had a gimmick at the time, which was like sort of like a conspiracy theory thing after he must have lost the title to, I think it was it was Dean Malenko, I think, at the time. And he was kind of going through this like really just comical thing around like it was everyone's fault but his. And so like he was really like quite a bright spot on, you know, a WCW show that was kind of just Hogan and Nash and Hall just constantly like, you know, it was interesting to me to kind of see the likes of a rising Chris Jericho at that time with such a different kind of angle than the NWO shit that we were getting every week. So he definitely started to be on my radar then, I think.
I think it's a good point you make there, and it says a lot really that at this point, like he's rising in a company that is probably being shadowed quite a lot by the because NWO was a massive thing at the time. Hogan being on the promotion was a massive thing at the time, and all due respect to Hogan, they were never known for putting people over, and it's probably a testament to him that he was rising in a company that could have easily overshadowed many other people, to be fair. So we reach a point now, Carl. We get to 1999. Yeah, we're all panicked about the Y2K virus, but WWF are panicked about something else, aren't they, Carl?
They are.
So we see the debut of none other than Chris Jericho, Y2J, for the first time in WWF, as it was at the time in 1999. And again, this just so happens to be around the time I actually started taking as big an interest in wrestling as I did, and certainly in WWF, because I know there was a couple of bits of WCW for me in the past, but this was probably the point. The Attitude Era was a big thing. Wrestling was a massive thing in our high school, Carl, as you might recall. You might recall a few pedigrees and DDTs to remember that by. But certainly, you know, wrestling was insanely massive at this point for not just you and me, but for pretty much everyone in our age group. It was probably one of the more talked about things, and took over our high school. And one of the biggest names in that was Jericho.
It was probably the peak, I think, of wrestling around 98, 99. So for us, obviously going into high school at that point in time, where, you know, historically, I wasn't really that, you know, there wasn't that many wrestling fans, I suppose. It was kind of just mainly me and like one or two others. But when we were there, like the start of high school, like it was literally a phenomenon. Like everybody watched it. So it was kind of, it was white hot at that point, and it was obviously a fantastic time for Jericho to make his debut when there was so many eyeballs on the product.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to brush over too much of his history before WWF, but certainly for me, I think this is probably the first and probably biggest example of witnessing someone evolve into a legend. Do you know what I mean? Because we saw the debut, We saw, I mean, he seemed to debut with a massive head of steam as well, because he straight away come in going up against the likes of Triple H and The Rock, which again, these are people are big talkers, and he massively held his own straight off the bat, and didn't miss a beat as far as I'm concerned. I mean, everyone who works for WWF or WWE as they are now has had to deal with some crap storylines, but everything in that sort of debut, for me anyway, was just absolute gold. I mean, do you recall sort of his debut and his initial sort of back and forth with The Rock? Because I know a lot of people would be like, "Oh, The Rock's the best talker in the biz," but personally, I think he massively held his own there.
Oh God, yeah. I think as well, like at the time in WCW, he wasn't really seen as a main event guy. Like obviously being the television champ, and
that's the thing, because you'll note from that he never actually attained the WCW championship, not in WCW, funnily enough. So that does sort of say where his status in WCW at the time.
Well, yeah. So I think when he made his debut, and there was a lot of like little vignettes, which has been a theme over the years for Jericho. Like he's always really good at making, like in this case his debut, but whenever he pops up, there's always some kind of mystique or something that kind of gets you kind of grip with it. But for the Y2J thing, it was exactly as you said around the whole Y2K impending doom of of everything going tits up with a change to the year 2000, and he was just proper propelled into main event status then on his debut, debuting, interrupting The Rock and being able to hang with him on the mic, as you said. Like you can't ask for any better than that, really.
You can't. And bear in mind as well, I mean, that must have been a mammoth task for him. I know he knows how to talk. Do you know what I mean? We've seen him in WWE over the years. We've seen the way he is in AEW, but this is he's just come from WCW over to WWF. He's on the back foot in that sense. The audience are all behind The Rock anyway, and to come out to that sort of crowd and excel to the point that you're winning people over. Fantastic. It must have been a fantastic moment and a fantastic thing to do for him, to be fair.
Oh yeah, definitely. And he's such a bright mind for the business. Like he'd already turned up and he was already doing his whole, welcome to Raw is Jericho, and the next time Raw rocked around, you would see, Raw is Jericho signs everywhere, and it was like he just took off. It was proper incredible debut, really.
He knows a thing or two about catchphrases, I'll be honest.
He's maybe had 1 or 70 over the years.
Yeah, definitely. So before we talk about, because he's been in and out of WWE over the years, but just to discuss a few of his accolades before we go into sort of his actual tenure in WWE and some of the highlights. I think it's worth to note that he was the first ever unified or undisputed, maybe the right term, whichever, WWF champion or world champion, obtaining both the WCW world title from the Invasion angle along with the WWE title. He was also he's been held the Intercontinental Championship a record 9 times, Carl. 9 times for the IC title, which you love the IC titles, the workers' belts. That must be one for you. You love that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's apparently the 9th Triple Crown champion. You're better with these stats than I am, but he's also apparently the 4th Grand Slam champion in history as well.
Interesting.
So I think the European's in there somewhere as well, but obviously everyone's forgotten about the European now. WWE certainly has. No offense to the title. There we go.
Interestingly, I don't actually ever recall Jericho with the European title. Like I could be wrong. I know he's been in matches before where both belts have been on the line. I think he was actually.
This is the bit where I get a little bit lost on it, because he was in a match where both were on the line and it involved Kurt Angle, I believe, and Chris Benoit, and I think he both lost and won a title. I feel like that's sort of the shenanigans that happened there. He lost the IC to Kurt and won the European, maybe.
I think from memory, I think Kurt was the double champ. I think he was the IC and European champ, and he basically, I can't remember, but basically, Kurt lost both titles that night. But it could have been that Jericho won that and Benoit won the IC, maybe. But I don't remember him as a European champion.
Yeah. But I mean, it's the European Championship, Carl. It's a weaker IC title, isn't it? Let's be honest.
I've got a lot of love for the European title. I think it's especially in like today's product as well, where there's so many guys, so many top guys. Like it's always been looked at as like this like tertiary title. You've got the world, you've got the Intercontinental, and then the European. But like you look at the guys who've held that title as well, and like who've made it into something. I don't know. I'm a big mark for it, really.
And I mean, how do you, not to digress from the topic too much, but how do you feel? Because there was a time when you didn't have the US title and you only had the European, and then the US title's become a bigger thing now. So how do you feel in terms of that? I mean, would you rather see a European title on a brand rather than the US title? Or
I mean, I suppose I'm indifferent over the name of that belt. I just think it's more the utilization of it. Like the US title's just been in limbo forever, and obviously at the minute they've got spoilers, but they've obviously crowned a new champion.
Yes, I have a lot of fear over that. We'll discuss that.
So it's one of them. Like maybe there could be a resurgence of it or something. I just think the European title back in the day was used a lot better than the US title. So I'm indifferent. You could call it whatever fucking title you want, but I just think it's important to have a title that is, for the guys who aren't quite ready for the IC title. And I know it's different today, where you've obviously got one title on one show and the other one on a
yeah.
show.
They're essentially two IC level titles, aren't they? Or they're meant to be.
Yeah.
Except they both kind of get fucking lost. Sadly, even the IC title's not had a great run.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
Very vocal on the appearance of the IC title, so it's kind of lost all, notoriety for me until they bring back a belt design that is actually worthy of that belt.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But yeah, I feel like I made us digress a tad there onto title. We'll probably have to do a segment on titles at some point, to be honest. But let's talk about his first run then, Carl. So obviously, for me, the notable sort of things in his first run were the feuds with Triple H.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, some of his back and forth with Stephanie McMahon as a result of that, or with Triple H over Stephanie McMahon and stuff like that. One of his top insults, which I I insulted you with earlier today, comes from that sort of angle. And obviously the invasion angle, because for me, I know a lot of people hated the invasion angle, and it could have been better had they have handled the acquisition of WCW and their talent a lot better. But one of the standout things and one of the helpful things for that angle was Chris Jericho, because he formerly was with ECW and WCW. It always had that. I don't know if you remember, but there was always that sort of question mark as to, is he going to turn on them and stuff, and that added that sort of elements of I know interest, I suppose, in the angle, because in terms of star power, there wasn't a lot of WCW stars coming through to help that invasion element out. And I think, given that he was a big star, albeit not, like you say, he weren't the top of WCW at the time, leaving for the WWF, but he was a big star in WCW. So it sort of, to me, it massively helped that storyline, having Jericho involved in that. And one of the notable things for me for his initial run in WWE.
Yeah, I think he was instrumental in that, and I think to the point you made earlier as well. Like, one thing that always stands out to me as some of Jericho's, I don't want to say it's his best work, but some stuff that always kind of resonated with me was that little mini feud he had with Stephanie at the time, and there were so many one-liners and so many jabs and stuff that he took at her in that kind of in that time that they're just like there's one, I know you mentioned one before, which you could probably talk about in a sec, but there's one for me where it was like during the invasion angle, I think, and Steph was the leader of ECW or whatever, and she was in the ring with Rhino, and he said something like, okay, so we've got the gore, and then the whore. It's like the look on her face. It's just
it's just pure priceless attitude there as well, man.
Yeah.
But I mean, it shows you, like, to be fair to Steph, like they've all signed off on that sort of storyline, and she was willing to sort of have that sort of back and forth. Fair play to her as well for that kind of thing. But yeah, I think just while it comes into my mind, it's probably also worth noting is he was, I don't know if he was the first, but he's certainly the most notable person to take on China as well.
Yeah, I mean, those feuds they had over the IC title was like he's got the Midas touch. Anything he touches can turn to gold. Like, no matter how shit it looks on the surface. We'll probably get onto this in a bit, but like the Fandango feud, for example, when he came back and it was like, oh, he's wrestling Fandango. He probably had arguably one of the best matches on that WrestleMania card with Fandango. And I think the China stuff was very similar kind of ilk, really, because it wasn't something I was really keen to see, but he just
it's a curious thing. It is a real curious thing as to whether, and I don't know, you never know for sure unless you're in the biz, but I don't know if WWE have a, like, when they're down on somebody, they try and put them in shit to make them look worse or something, and whether that was the intent here, because WWE have historically and still are very squeamish about sort of intergender matches, and like you say, it felt like this wasn't going to work. And yeah, I think that you've hit the nail on the head with the Midas touch, because it was it's some of the best work really that China's had. It really helped legitimize her as a threat to not just the women's roster but to the men's. And they were really good matches. And it's surprising really that having that sort of response to them, that WWF kind of then pulled back, and they're still very squeamish to this day about having mixed gender matches for some reason.
Yeah, and I think as well, from like if memory serves correctly, I think he had 2 runs with China. So he had the initial run with her for the IC title, and then there was one where she was with Eddie Guerrero as like his girlfriend or something at the time, and there was like a little like trifecta of shenanigans going on there with all 3 of them as well. But every time he made her seem like a star, but he didn't damage himself or didn't kind of come off bad by it or anything like that. He was. If anything, he gets whatever he's given and just makes it go over.
Oh yeah, totally. So I want to mention as well, obviously we talked about his initial run there. So one of the biggest things in his initial run as well is Triple H. Obviously he had some fantastic feuds with Triple H. Obviously we all remember the Last Man Standing match. I can't remember what pay-per-view it was on, but it was that stellar Last Man Standing match. I think it was the culmination of that feud that involves Steph and a lot of that elements of it. But there was a sort of, I keep using this phrase, so apologies, but there was that weird sort of bit as well on a week of Raw, I think before the pay-per-view, that involved shenanigans in which Jericho actually won the world title off Triple H, and then the decision was rescinded. That was how did you feel about that one? Because obviously, like, they went on to have some fantastic matches between each other. It was a hell of a feud, but it was such a weird fucking booking decision that.
Oh yeah, and I remember at the time a much younger version of myself just being absolutely fuming. But I think the thing that kind of stood out was the crowd reaction when he'd won it, because it kind of just showed that, for me, that was like the first inkling that Chris Jericho wasn't just a European IC title guy. He was going to be a main eventer, because the fans they just lapped it up when he got that win.
It's bits like this for me though that make me wonder whether WWE knew what they were doing and tested the waters with it. So they knew he was sort of ready for a proper title run, and they wanted to test the waters with it and simultaneously anger us all and get us all behind them more so, or whether it was, I don't want to say fuck up, because it was definitely a booking decision, but it's like, I don't know, it screams like really strange booking, but at the same time, it's like you say, it's one of the things that made you go, fuck, yeah, the people want this, the crowd want this, and we did. So I don't know, it's always kind of a strange one, that, but I suppose that kind of at least cemented it for the writers or for Vince, that like, look at the crowd reaction, look what they want.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that was when Vince and everyone else was like, okay, this guy can hang, so he's definitely going to have a big future with us. But I think, like, this might be controversial because I enjoyed the match and everything, but I'll go back prior to what I'm talking about in terms of this match. But we mentioned Jericho was the first undisputed champ, and he beat The Rock and Stone Cold on the very same night and ended up picking up both titles and was the first one to unify them, which was a huge deal at the time, because again, we've gone from his fake title win that got revoked to when he became he was the holder of both, and he was the first guy to unify them. So that was huge. But that kind of, we're talking about the Triple H rivalry. For me, the build up to the WrestleMania 18 main event was poor.
Yeah,
and
I'm with you on that one. I'll go on. You're going to say it, but I think we're both on the same page as to what the fuck was wrong with that.
Yeah, and I think the match itself was fine. Don't get me wrong, and I think Triple H. It was when he came back from his. Was it when he came back from rupturing his quad or something? And he was obviously white hot at the time.
Because am I right in saying that was it'll have been about 2001, so it will have been when Triple H come back. Not long after he come back, actually, as well.
That was definitely something which at the time I proper marked out for, and I was like, okay, this is going to be an epic feud. We've seen these guys draw money together before, so it's going to be more of the same. But for me, the whole kind of build up to that match centered far too much around the Triple H Stephanie kind of misadventures of their kind of marriage and stuff. And it didn't really, considering that Jericho had been the first undisputed champ, it didn't really legitimize him the way that I felt it needed to. And he was just kind of like a bystander in the Triple H Stephanie stuff.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. That's pretty much how I was going to put it. Is that he was a bit player in his own feud, because it did seem to be overshadowed by this. I don't want to call it romance, domestic difficulties, but yeah, it was a bit of a strange choice, and sadly come off such an epic win. And they always go down as the first unified champion, even if they have fucked around with them titles that much that I don't even know if they're unified anymore.
Who knows?
But
Who knows?
but you can never take that. He was the first one to hold them both. He was the first one to unify them, and sadly, I don't think that particular sort of angle ended well. It was still an epic moment, and like you say, the match itself wasn't too bad, but the sort of the booking before, or the way it was sort of dealt with beforehand, probably didn't do him any favors. One of the rare times we don't see him get something over, but I don't think he had enough screen time to work with that properly, to be honest.
No, and to be honest, I think that whole thing ended up hurting him because he was the first, champ, and then the way he was handled afterwards, kind of, I don't think he ended up being back in that scene for a while. Then after that, I think he kind of was more IC and stuff.
Yeah.
After the fact, but yeah, I don't know. It was a shame really because it's such a incredible kind of feat for him to be the first undisputed champ, and I was so shocked at the time. I was like, "Fucking hell, Jericho! Like they give it to Jericho. That's amazing." I just didn't expect it. But then, yeah, I just felt like he was a little bit mismanaged after that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. So we'll leap forward then, if we could, to 2005, Carl. Chris Jericho has got a bag full of brass rings that he's reached and grabbed, and he's sort of burnt out on the wrestling biz and takes a bit of time off. So we've no longer got Jericho on our screens, and I don't know if you remember much between 2005 and 2007, but I don't think there was much going on, I'll be honest. So we had a mystery building up. I'm going to say early 2007. In a similar sense. Now, I'm interested how you feel on this, because there's a bit of up and down as to how this was received. For me, I liked it, but there was it felt very similar, or similar nods to his original debut. And we were getting these sort of, these codes this time. I think there was like various bits like save us and so on like that. And it ultimately led to him returning in November 2007. As the person behind these sort of mysterious vignettes and codes and such, obviously with this sort of code breaker element to it. So obviously the code was breaking. It was Save Us Y2J. He debuted. I think this is the point he debuted his new finisher with the code breaker being his finisher. And again, I think he always adds something to the show anyway. But I know there was a lot of sort of like, oh, it wasn't as good, and it was just more of the same. But how did you feel? Because I actually enjoyed this mystery in this debut, especially because it all felt very sudden as well. I distinctly remember, I think he clotheslined someone backstage, and you couldn't see who it was, and then it zoomed out, and it was him in that typical Jericho pose, and you're like, fuck, it's Jericho. I was made up to see him back. I didn't really concentrate too much on like, oh yeah, this was very similar to, because it wasn't similar in the code sense, it was, but it wasn't similar. But how did you feel about it? Were you hyped when you saw this?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it was similar at all to his debut. I think where it went wrong was the way the vignettes were done and handled and stuff like that. It felt a little bit Undertaker-y. So I think people got themselves quite hyped,
right, I'm with you, yeah.
thinking, okay, Taker's coming back. And then, some people were kind of pissed the fact it was Jericho. I was loving it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was definitely all for this. I don't know what it is. These little like mysterious mystique kind of things. I really buy into them. Like, even though SmackDown is very hit and miss for me at the minute. Like this, who's the rumor guy? Or
I think SmackDown could do with remembering they've got that gimmick going, because it's been ignored for 2 fucking weeks now.
Well, exactly. But yeah, like stuff like that. Like I'll go and research it and try and figure out who it is and stuff like that. And for me, the Save Us stuff that was coming on, I was all over it. I was like, who is this? Is it Taker? Is it?
Yeah, trying to get the mystery. Yeah.
Yeah. So like for me, I fanboyed over the whole thing, and I think the way that he did come back as well, the way you mentioned, where it was just a clothesline to someone, and then you just panned out, and it was like, oh fucking hell, Jericho's here. It was like, yeah. I don't know. I just thought it was quite a nice little return.
Oh yeah, and at this point, I'm already a fanboy, so it's like, fuck, Jericho's back. It's someone I know. in this crowd, because I think we were firmly in ruthless aggression at this point, and it's not the same. So I was made up to see him back. Regardless of how you feel the vignettes went. And this obviously led to, and I don't want to gloss over too much, but this led to probably for me his biggest heel run in WWE, when he went up against Shawn Michaels, and it had so much emotion to it, obviously because Shawn was a big hero for Chris. So and I think there was a lot of similarities, and you're always one for this when there's similarities between two wrestlers, you love to see them go toe to toe. So I'm imagining you were a massive fan of this run as well.
Oh God, yeah. That whole thing with the highlight reel with him and Shawn Michaels and throwing him into the TV, and then I think
sorry,
there's even a segment
well, you threw him into the Gerotron.
Oh, my bad.
That's no normal TV there, Cal.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. How foolish of me. The Gerotron 3000, actually, the best model. But yeah, so obviously all that kind of shenanigans happened. I think there was even a segment in there where he punched Shawn's wife in the face.
Oh yeah,
at one point.
No, he went full on villain, like just despicable.
Yeah. But it was a very different Jericho for me, this, because it wasn't like the whiny catchphrasey kind of. He was a bit Piperish for me. He was just really like reserved and like calculated and cold. But then he would also kind of when he needed to, he would just come across like a fucking psychopath. And I don't know. For me, it was a different strand of Jericho, but one that, part of me thinks I probably preferred that to his kind of really brash, outlandish kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
This is that thing for me, that this is where, and we'll touch on it when we get over to AEW eventually, but this is where he's the master of moving the gimmick when it needs it, because he came out and he was the Ayatollah of rock and roller, and he was that, like you say, he was very brash, he was very, very loud character, and it really fitted to the Attitude Era. And I don't know if it was entirely his doing or whether there was creative involvement in that side, but I think the heel turn and that evolution of his character was certainly the right move for this era. And like you say, it was fantastic. And for me, I'm glad it weren't just him coming back as that character, as that rock and roll loudmouth character, because I don't know how well that would have played overall over time, whether it would have been a bit, tiresome. And I even feel mean saying that, because Jericho's awesome, but at the same time, he's evolved the character into this, this despicable villain character, which was, like you say, I think you've made the right shout there with the Piper shouts. That's, it had echoes of that sort of element to it. But I think this is probably the first instance where I'd say, like, he definitely knows how to evolve his character, and he's always changing. I think that's why he's still so prevalent in the business at the age of 49. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think to have the kind of foresight to go, well, do you know what? I'm not just going to stick with what I know works and like ride the retro kind of I'm back kind of train. He was, okay, I'm going to try getting a different take of this character over. And a lot of people think that this was the best Jericho. Like I definitely enjoyed it. I don't know whether it was personally. I honestly don't know, but I think
without sort of making it sound like a proper cop-out, it was the right Jericho for the right time. Because as I'm talking to you right now, my personal favourite Jericho, and we'll get onto him, was Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho.
Okay.
But we'll get onto it because we'll be coming up to that shortly. But which to me, again, well, I don't know. Is there any more you want to say in the heel bit? Because I'm going to start leaning into this, unfortunately.
No, I don't think so. I just think, the Shawn Michaels thing was fantastic, and like the rivalry those two had, and like you mentioned, the kind of the similarity between them as performers and stuff as well. Like it was definitely, peak Jericho, like, that we'd ever seen up to that point. I think he had a rivalry with Rey Mysterio as well at some point around like the Mexican heritage stuff. But
it was in and around that time, to be fair. Now I don't know whether you recall it specifically, but I don't recall a moment where he was like gone from the business, if you know what I mean, at this point. I remember him returning for the Fandango stuff, but I don't remember a point when it's like, he just sort of stopped being on TV, do you know what I mean? And obviously we know Jericho's taken time out before now for various rock and roll things, but I don't recall a particular, like, I don't know, news thing about it, do you know what I mean? Where it was like, oh shit, he's left, or there's been this animosity or anything like that. I think it was just, again, just had some time out. But obviously then we see another return for him, which I think you alluded to before. But I think it was about 2013. He's back in it, and he's starting a program with Fandango, which again is a very Jericho thing to do. Fandango's an up and comer, and Jericho is probably the right man to try and build a good story with him and put him over. Now, you've mentioned that you were quite a fan of this. I know this takes a lot of stick, this angle. I think because a lot of people weren't really a fan of Fandango's whole thing. But you said you quite enjoyed the whole, or the match itself, was it, or the whole angle?
Yeah, like the match itself was definitely one of the best matches on that WrestleMania card. I think, as with all the rest of the Jerichoholics out there, once you find out he's facing Fandango kind of out of nowhere on his return match, and then for Fandango to go over as well, you are kind of like, what the fuck? But like, I don't think anybody else could have, given Fandango that level of push. And it's not Jericho's fault that WWE didn't capitalize on that. And I think that the match itself. So, ironically, this whole character got created because Vince was like, well, Chris Jericho's on Dancing with the Stars. Wouldn't it be funny if we had like a ballroom dancer? So it's like, it's like a full
good shit.
Yeah. So like the whole thing came full circle, really. Like the whole inception of this gimmick was from Jericho. So then it's Jericho and him at WrestleMania. So, but I thought the match itself was really good, considering Fandango was quite green and he was a new star. I thought it did the purpose of getting him over. It was a really good match, and Jericho just made the best out of it. He wasn't happy about it. You've seen various stuff where he's openly said that he was pissed to come back and have to fight Fandango. That wasn't his choice at all. But at the end of the day, that's what he got given. And he pitched several other ideas that got rejected, and it was Fandango. So he was like, well, I'm just going to make it the best I can be.
I don't know if it was one of Chris's suggestions, but I know one of the original ideas was to have him go up against Ryback, who was, again, another one who was an up-and-coming at the time, booked in a similar vein to Goldberg, which, again, could have worked really well. Obviously, we never got to see that, but I can totally see not being overly enthused by it, especially with the sort of brainchild of Vince McMahon being, well, you did the Dance on the Stars thing, and it's not the best, and again they worked with what they had, and I mean, I don't particularly remember this WrestleMania, if I'm honest with you, Carl, but I know you said it was probably one of the best matches on the card. It probably wasn't a very big WrestleMania, in all fairness. So they're always big, do you know what I mean? But as far as memorable ones,
I think as well it was one of the earlier matches on the card. I don't think it opened the show. I might just Google this in the background, but just because I'll be thinking about it the whole time otherwise.
No, that's fair enough.
But yes, it was a WrestleMania 29, I think it was, maybe.
I want to say 29 because I feel like 30 was bigger. I don't think. I don't know. Again, not being disrespectful to 29, but I don't really remember it all too well. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult with, like, I've not really looked into Fandango's feelings on his whole gimmick too much, but it must be a really hard gimmick to get over anyway, the whole ballroom dance, I think, because it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, they did the Fashion Police thing as well with Tyler Breeze. Wow, I nearly forgot his name for a sec there. And again, there must be something there with them, because they both did a good job at sort of getting that to be something. But they're never strong gimmicks when there's something like that. It's never someone you're going to go, yeah, they're going to be a world champion one day. So, all credit to them for getting something like that, or getting that match over. Anyway.
I believe as well, from what I've heard from Jericho after the fact, is he's got nothing but nice words to say about Fandango as well. Like he's very aware that gimmick is, it's really hard to kind of pull off and kind of have any kind of longevity to it. So he's got nothing but nice words to say, I think, about Fandango, and he's quite aware it's not Fandango's fault why it didn't get over. I think it was just the fact that, because if you remember at one point, like, the fans were singing his fucking theme song, like they were just humming his theme. Like he was really over, and they just wasted it. So
I think sometimes they box themselves into a corner though, and they don't know where to go with something. And I don't think it was I think if they'd have known what to do with him, they would have done. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it was a deliberate effort to not use that momentum. I think they just probably didn't fucking know what to do, and we've seen it a few times.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, have you Googled, Carl, or would you just want
to? Oh yeah, I Googled. It was 29.
29. There we go.
Pretty shite WrestleMania, to be fair. It was the main event was the Cena Rock rematch.
Oh yeah, see that the twice in a lifetime bollocks. Yeah.
You had Triple H, Lesnar, Undertaker, Punk, Del Rio versus Jack Swagger. You know what I mean? Mark Henry was the one who went up against Ryback.
Again, I don't want to digress all too much here, but shouldn't that have been a really good Mania? Triple H against Lesnar, CM Punk, who was, shit hot at the time, against The Undertaker. Shouldn't that have been an awesome Mania?
You'd think so.
And it's one you barely... I don't even remember the Punk Undertaker match.
No.
Crazy stuff, man. Again, slight digression, but it shows you how big an effect booking can have. Right, so we move on to probably one of my favourite bits of this run, Carl, and one of the best Jerichos as far as I'm concerned. The slightly playful but not, full-on Attitude Era Jericho in the Festival of Friendship, the whole angle, Carl. The friendship and inevitable betrayal with Kevin Owens. Now, you love Kevin Owens as well.
Yeah.
So what did you make of this whole angle?
I love the whole thing. So, I mean, obviously the whole kind of thing culminated in this Festival of Friendship, but Jericho's kind of return around this time, he was basically being used as like a comedy character, which again, I think it's kind of big of him to kind of not come back and be like, well, no, I want to be in the main event or I want to be champion or whatever.
What I think's awesome is to come back as a comic character, like per se, but not be a joke. He was still a serious wrestler. He still had that massive credibility to him, but he weren't taking himself too seriously. I think it's an incredible line to walk, but he did it so well, where you don't end up not taking him seriously. But like you say, it was mostly a comedic role.
Yeah, and again, it was another kind of gimmick flex, wasn't it? It wasn't like a brand new thing necessarily, but it was different enough to make it feel fresh.
I think it's fair to say he more evolves his character than full on gimmick change, really, doesn't he? I think the closest we've ever seen to a full-on gimmick change is probably the Painmaker, which we'll go on to. But I think it's just a slow evolution of Chris Jericho as a character, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, like it's the way he can get over, like the backstage interviews. Do you know what I mean? He's like calling him Tim instead of Tom, and then Mark instead of Mike, or whatever the guy was called and stuff. And then he gets them confused. And like, you're clones. And you know what happens when two clones turn up? You make the list. It's just, I don't know. Like the whole thing was just the way he got
this
over,
angle gave. Sorry, it's worth noting for anyone who's listening. This angle was the one that gave birth to the infamous list of Jericho.
Oh yeah, it was the way he can get over as well, like a little fucking notepad of writing people's names down and stuff. To be honest, it was quite funny because it kind of reminded me a little bit of old school WCW Jericho, the whole conspiracy thing I mentioned earlier, where he had a list of people who was responsible for why he lost the title to Dean Malenko, and it was like, but it felt fresh.
I thought, do you know what I thought you were going to go to when you mentioned the list in WCW, when he was the man of 1,004 holds?
Again, that was it around the time of the Dean Malenko thing. Those two,
because wasn't Malenko known as the man of 1,000 holds?
Yeah,
and so he one-upped him.
He apparently made a list of all Malenko's holds and was like, the guy only actually knows like 912. I know 1,004. And then like he started to read every single one out.
He literally read them as well. That was again funny as fuck, really. But that's when you mentioned then WCW Jericho and lists. That's where my head went to straight away. Then.
Well, that's it. But I mean, like it's one of them. We've seen him do it before, but it didn't feel like a rehash. It was something brand new. And the way, like, because he was playing a comedy character, and the way he'd be like, to me, like the funniest bits were the little setups where he'd be like, you know what it means, huh? You know what it means? Tom, Tim, Tom. You made the list. It's just like, I don't know. He was comic genius, I think, at that time.
And obviously, this was a massive thing for Kevin Owens, who, as we already know, he's a massive fan of wrestling. Before he got into the wrestling game, he was a massive fan of wrestling, and I think he cited Chris Jericho as one of his heroes, among many others. But I know he was absolutely stoked to be working with Jericho. And this done nothing but great things for putting him over. I think he was actually Universal Champion at the time, which a lot of people were surprised at. Because correct me if I'm wrong, I think this came off that weird sort of Finn Balor came out of NXT, won the title, and then got totally fucking ruined by Rollins and had to relinquish the title. And then I don't know if he immediately got it, but that it was around that time that we sort of saw the Kevin Owens build and run. As much as I don't know how you felt about it, and I don't want to digress from the Jericho element too much, but a lot of people like maybe didn't feel he was ready for it, but they forget he's been in the wrestling game before WWE, so I think it was a really good run. Certainly better than some other Universal champs have had.
I think the problem with it was the way he won it was Triple H turning on Seth to set up that feud, and it was like,
oh fuck yeah, I forgot it, yeah.
Owens got it, and then they didn't really have anything for him, and it was like, well, okay, well, obviously it's going to be slightly lackluster because you've not got any plans for the guy. You know, he's your world champ. But I think because it was a new kind of belt and the fan reaction to the way it looked with the fucking garish red strap and stuff like that, I think initially it got a bit shit on. So I do feel for Owens, to be fair, in that regard. But, you know, the whole, and we're going to talk about the Festival of Friendship now, but the whole kind of point was for WrestleMania to be, the big payoff was going to be Owens versus Jericho for that Universal Championship. But then last minute, they ruined it because they had Owens lose it to Goldberg, and then they put I think they put Owens and Jericho on second, and Jericho apparently was saying that was one of the final straws for him with WWE. It was like, who goes on second? First you can get, because you're kind of setting the precedent for the show, you're opening it and so on and so forth. But the second spot is traditionally just filler material, and you know, that match just got put on and they did the best they could. You know, Owens got chewed out after the match by Vince. He said he hated the match, and Owens got punished for quite a while off the back of that. So it's crazy considering how good the Festival of Friendship was to see.
Yeah. And to be honest, even that shocking betrayal, you know, that turn from Owens, a fantastic culmination to the whole thing as well. I don't know. It's like you say, it's shocking, like how Vince can take a dislike to one thing and it just fucking ruins your career for a bit, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, but, and it was so good the way they did that as well. It was like a classic turn, you know what I mean? Like because Jericho, even though the fans were into him, he was meant to be a heel at this point, and it was just the way he was like, you know, because Owens had got him a new list. He's like, why is my name on here? And then the next minute he just got battered, and you just felt so sorry for the guy. I fucking love that segment. That was my favorite segment of the year.
Yeah. Do you feel like, because I know he threw him through the television, do you think that was echoes to the original heel run of Jericho where he threw Michaels through the Geritron?
You know what? It wouldn't surprise me, because knowing what a mind Jericho's got for it, and
just like a small detail
he does, like, it wouldn't surprise me if he said, okay, this is what we should do because this got over with Shawn and blah blah blah. But yeah, I loved every second of that. It was so good.
Yeah. No, one of the best feuds I've seen him have, especially in within that year. And unless there's anything you want to say about his WWE run, Carl,
Nope.
Shall we move on to what he's been doing since?
Let's do it.
So I can't talk too much on his immediate sort of leaving of WWE. I think there was a little bit of crossover as well, because he started doing some work for New Japan, but I think he was still slightly contracted to WWE for some elements. So there was a bit of crossover there, but ultimately goes over to New Japan in 2017, 2018, and then starts to hone this sort of Painmaker gimmick. Did you see much of his New Japan stuff? I know we've seen the Painmaker and we've seen some of the stuff he's done with AEW as a result, because that sort of spanned from this whole work in New Japan. But did you see much of him in Japan and that sort of side of it?
You know what? Unfortunately, no. And it's like such a shame, because I've seen, as you said, I've seen the gimmick, I've seen the reactions to the gimmick, I've seen like one or two little bits on AEW, and I've obviously seen stuff after the fact. But it is such a shame that we don't really follow Japanese wrestling, because he, you know, by all accounts, he made a massive deal when he went there.
Yeah, and well, by all accounts, he's got a history of work in Japan before now. I think he knows how it works. I think he knows it is a different scene. You know, it's a different world really in a lot of respects. Even the actual wrestling is different. It's a bit more hardcore from what I gather, or from what we sort of given the impression of when you see the likes of Shinsuke and the like. It's more strong style, isn't it, than anything else? But nevertheless, his run in New Japan, the build of this Painmaker element, and some of the relationships he's forged led to ultimately the start of and his current run in AEW. So firstly, for me, I think I'd have probably enjoyed AEW regardless. I think it's nice to see a fresh promotion, especially one with enough behind them to rival WWE. I don't think they've had a rival for a very long time. Certainly not a legitimate one. No offense, TNA. But I think Jericho, as being one of the is figurehead the right term, Carl? I think he's got an actual title with them, but I'm going to say figurehead. One of the biggest names in AEW, really helped legitimize the promotion. And his initial run there, and ultimately becoming the first ever AEW, and I can't say it anymore, bastard, I was going to call him the youngest, but I think Moxley might have pipped him to that. But the first ever AEW World Champion helped legitimize that title, and we've seen him do nothing but build up and help put people over. He is the person who has got us so hyped behind the likes of Santana and Ortiz, Sammy Guevara, even Jake Hager, who we all knew. But this has been the most impressive I've seen him in a long time. So what's your thoughts on his AEW run up to now? I mean, we mention him every week.
I honestly, it feels weird to say I think this is my favorite Jericho, because he is just money every time he's there. And like, it's even small things. Like, I remember when Hager first debuted, and then, you know, it was the formation of the Inner Circle, and it was back when there was crowds at wrestling shows, you know, believe it or not. And you know, the fans were getting on Hager's back and going like, "We the people," and chanting that. And he, like, Jericho just owned that moment, and he, you know what I mean? He was so really candid with it, and just basically said, "We the people sucked. It was from a bad company with bad creative, and it's shit, and that ends now." And everyone was just like, that was it. No one's ever chanted "We the people" since. You know what I mean? It was just because he's at that status now where he knows, like, he knows himself, and he knows that he can have the fans in the palm of his hand and stuff. He's at that level where he controls everything. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I just think there's so many segments where he's just had me in stitches. Like,
I mean, look at, like, you've got you know, he introduced yet another catchphrase, king of the catchphrase. He introduced a little bit of the bubbly. He's introduced I don't know if it ever became a full-on catchphrase, but people were doing that "I have a ticket" thing for a little bit when they had the whole backstage ruckus, and he was justifying his presence there. We've had the bubbly bunch. We've had all this back and forth with the elite,
the
in
Champion,
general, you know, the Champion, the lexicon of the Champion, which was clearly just a jab at the list. But he's in that short amount of time, he's built up so many hysterical moments, so many fantastic matches. This is where you and me got to see the Painmaker in action, because again, we don't really follow New Japan, but even that, just like, you know, let's do this. Then he went to that level. I want to say it was Darby Allin. Was it Darby Allin he went up against?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And at a point proven, he went in as the Paymaker, and it was, again, you just get to see the evolution of Jericho. I can't remember what pay-per-view it was. I want to say it was Double or Nothing, but I could be wrong. But that entrance he did, where you got to see that sort of evolution of all of his different characters as he was coming out, was fantastic. It just that again, it really made me sort of look at the storied career he has and go, fucking hell, he's just an absolute legend in the business. But yeah, I mean, where do you think he's going with this one, Cal? Like, he seems to have, I don't know if you feel this way, but it's almost like a bit of a backstep from the sort of in-ring title scene elements, and more sort of he's there for the notoriety, and we're getting this stuff building with Mike Tyson now. But where do you reckon AEW are heading with him now? I think he's probably going to have some involvement for a good time going forward. I know there's a bit of fear not too long back that because there was a tour coming up for Fozzy, and people were thinking he was going to go, especially because he lost the title around that time as well, and obviously he didn't as well. So it seems like he's going to be there for a good while. But what do you reckon?
I can't see him going back to WWE anytime soon. I think he's with AEW for the foreseeable. You know, there will be a time where, you know, because he's a rock star as well. Like, he's a successful musician. He's not just like a guy who does it only for fun. Like Fozzy have got a fucking huge following, really. So he's definitely going to get to a point where, you know, when things go back to normal, he will go away for a bit and he'll go on tour. And I'm sure the way that he'll write him off will be spectacular. But I think I think you said it before, you kind of really hit the nail on the head when you were like, he legitimizes the company. And I think he really legitimized the AEW Heavyweight Championship by being the first guy to hold it. So I think it made absolute sense for him to be the champ. And then it also now makes absolute sense for him to spend his time getting everyone else over. Like the stuff with like sex gods, like Sammy Guevara he was a nobody. Do you know what I mean? Like I saw him for the very first time. I mean, in fact, I had to lie. I saw him once or twice for like Ring of Honor or like some like indie stuff, but like I don't really follow it. But like the first time that I proper saw Sammy was in his debut with Cody on the first Dynamite. I was like, fucking hell, this guy is like, he's pretty shit hot. Like he's going to be have an exciting future. But I never once thought like, oh, he's going to be over and stuff like that, like massively. And then you put him with Jericho, and it's like the sex gods, and you know, Sammy's been the focal point of Dynamite for the last few weeks, and you know, like getting hit by the fucking golf cart and running away from the horse, and like he's proper meme territory, and you know that's coming from, you know, the experience of Jericho, who must be helping him out on a daily basis. And I think, you know, the stuff with Britt Baker, I've mentioned a few times that this whole conspiracy thing is gimmicky in WCW. Britt Baker coming out this week, which we'll chat about when we get onto the the AEW updates and stuff. But
yeah. Which we've already done.
Oh, of course we have, 100%. Segment 3, this is segment 3. But she's mentioned previously that Chris Jericho's helped her out quite a bit with her work, and the whole kind of that whole promo that she did this week, where she was like, everyone was responsible for her injury and conspirator. It's the same gimmick. So you can just see the effect that Jericho's having on building these new stars up. So for me, I think he's going to be there for the foreseeable, but I think he's going to be definitely in a mentor kind of role.
I must say, right, Jericho and the way he handles AEW and the freedom and creative elements he's got in AEW, this is what really frustrates me with, and I don't like to get into WWE versus AEW. It annoys me when you see it on the internet, people trying to say one's better than the other. There's no reason you can't like both, But at the same time, people, every time AEW does anything with an existing legend, or they bring in somebody from WWE or anything like that, people like to jump on that and go, oh, see, everyone says WWE just relies on old stars. And they need to actually watch it properly, because Jericho is an absolute masterclass in how you use your older talent. And I think you were right in what you're saying there. Is like we're watching things, and he's definitely drawing names in. So when you go to the Stadium Stampede match, you're getting drawn in by the big names in there, the likes of Matt Hardy and Chris Jericho. But you're staying there and watching the likes of Sammy Guevara. Do you know what I mean? And that's how it's meant to work. That's what they should be doing, and that's what they are doing. It's not like Goldberg rocking up and squashing the Fiend in less than a minute or whatever, right? That is how you do not use an old talent. This is an absolute masterclass in how you use an older talent, because this legend has come along and he's pushed so many faces and younger talents that I'd never heard of, to the point that I'm invested in them now. Even if Jericho's I'm going on tour tomorrow, I'm still watching AEW and I'm still rooting for Sammy Guevara. I'm still rooting for Santana and Ortiz. I'm still behind Jake Hager. Do you know what I mean? These are all people who are now much more in the sort of the mainstay of AEW, with thanks to this man.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes him kind of a special blend, is he can do this, but he's also reinventing himself to the point where I'm kind of thinking this is the best version of Jericho. I think you said before he's 49. He's about to be 50. You'd never tell. And he might be the best version of himself that he's ever been, while still being able to put up, like, do you know what I mean? It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I think it's fair to say, when we mention his age, like, he is still fucking awesome in the ring.
Oh god, yeah.
All right, you could argue, he's probably not as talented as he was in his prime, but who is? I mean, I still couldn't do half the stuff he does. Still an absolute legend. Still puts on fantastic matches. But I absolutely love the creative input he's got to AEW. And half the reason we look forward to AEW is for, like, the Inner Circle antics. Let's be honest. Like the Bubbly Bunch segments, I was loving. They were brilliant. They don't seem to have done any in the last couple of weeks, but they were fantastic. I was enjoying them.
Yeah, same. Like the whole fucking flim flam thing, and like the reactions to it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just so funny, and they might not do that. That's what's so cool about them, is they might not do another Bubbly Bunch episode, but they're still there every week doing something. So obviously this week they're doing like the pep rally, and then what I mean, like they're always there. They've always got an opportunity to be like really funny, but they also make sure everybody in that stable shines. And it's like I don't know how long Jake Hager is still going to be in the game, and whether he sees himself as an MMA guy who's just doing kind of pro wrestling again for a little bit, or whether he actually wants to make another run. I know he's not super old. Do you know what I mean? So who knows?
I think he'll be there for another run. Like, if anything's going to encourage him to carry on and not go back to MMA, it'll be this, because he's had so much more fun here. Just from the look of him, anyway, he seems to be enjoying his run much more here than he ever did with WWE. But no, exciting things to come. I think just a little side note for me. Did you know, when you mentioned he is a legitimate rock star, he's in the band Fozzy, he actually does his own theme music for AEW, which is awesome. That he wasn't originally the lead singer of Fozzy.
No, I didn't know that.
I was doing a little bit of research there. Don't be wrong, he's been in there for a very long time, but apparently originally they were a cover band called Fozzy Osbourne, and they used to just get sort of what musicians were available at the time. And then Chris built up this friendship with the rest of them, and ultimately became their main lead singer. Then they dropped the Osbourne elements and became less of a tribute act and more of a legitimate band in their own right. But when you hear Fozzy, you think Jericho. Do you know what I mean? It's interesting that he went sort of. Or admittedly, it was only a very small window of time, but he went always in Fozzy. Just as a side note there.
Fun and educational, guys.
Fun and that's what we're about. That's what we're all about. So that is basically our talk on Jericho and why we love him. Is there any other notes you want to put on there, Carl?
I mean, we literally could spend hours chatting about this guy. I just think that
this is why we try and keep it as lean as we can. We are known for going off on a tangent, so I'm hoping we've kept this to a lean hour, maybe.
Maybe, who knows?
Maybe hour and a half. I don't know. Flies. We'll find out when I've edited it. but hopefully you've enjoyed and everyone's learned a little something, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah, defo. But no, I think I'm still excited to see what's next for him. You know, how the inner circle goes about, and you know, the stuff with Tyson. Do you know what I mean? He's getting eyeballs on the product, and I don't know. He is just a legend. So that's why he's our first choice to have an entire segment dedicated to him.